Another way to turn for this, I'll just point to them and then read something real. Within a certain strain of queer theory, there's been this investigations about intimacy, which seems to be along the same lines. I was thinking of Lauren Berlant and Eve Sedgwick. But let me read as another attempt, which seems to me to have great problems, at uniting Eros and Agape in a political project, and that's with Che Guevara. Because, at least in certain circles, I'm not sure if they're the same circles that many of you travel in, there's a sentence of Che Guevara that is on like innumerable posters and t-shirts and such, which talks about love and politics. So let me read to you it's a letter that was it's a sentence in a letter that Che wrote in 1965 when he was just going between the Congo. He'd returned to Cuba briefly, and then he went to Bolivia where he was killed. So this is what Che writes. He says, "Let me say," and this is the quoted part, "let me say with the risk of appearing ridiculous, that the true revolutionary is guided by strong feelings of love. It's impossible to think of an authentic revolutionary without this quality." So it seems like these two sentences, Che is saying exactly what my project would be in this regard, which is a love that unites Eros and Agape, that brings together the personal and the political, or rather, love for humanity. You see, I could have done, instead of with priests, I could have done it with communists too, because certain communist traditions very much like priests, saying that when I say that love is only agape, meaning love is only love of the people, or love of humanity, and excludes the other. Priests and a certain commie tradition go hand in hand in that regard. But let me go on in Che's letter, because it becomes much more difficult and with a great much more pathos than one would expect, I think. Because Che goes on to write, he says, "Our vanguard revolutionaries, himself included, must idealize their love for the people, for the most hallowed causes, and make it one and indivisible. They cannot descend with small doses of daily affection to the terrain where the common man puts his love into practice." He says, so he explains that the revolutionaries are breed apart. They're different than the ordinary population who are able to have eros. They're able to have romantic relationships. Revolutionaries, on the contrary, have to maintain their love for the people. And then he writes, continuing, and this has, like, even seems quite emotional to me because it's the situation of Che himself, who didn't meet many of his children, or only met them when he came to Cuba briefly and told his wife not to say who he was because he was just passing through to go to Bolivia. Anyway, Che writes, "The leaders of the revolution have children who do not learn to call their father with their first faltering words. They have wives who must be part of the general sacrifice of their lives to carry the revolution to its destination. Their friends are strictly limited to their comrades in revolution. There is no life outside the revolution." That has great pathos for me. I don't know if it does for you. But the pain, in a way, of living love only as love of the people and not being able to unite it with romantic love, with eros, etc. So Che finishes this in a way that doesn't seem to me at all to resolve it. He says, "In these conditions, the revolutionary leaders must have a large dose of humanity, a large dose of a sense of justice and truth to avoid falling into dogmatic extremes, into cold scholasticism, into isolation from the masses. They must struggle every day so that their love of living humanity is transformed into concrete deeds, into acts that will serve as an example, as a mobilizing factor." I guess the reason I've spent so much time on it is just to give you an idea of what seems to me both the power of that division between agape and eros, or between love of humanity and romantic love, and the power of it and the pathos or pain of that division. Okay, so let me move on now to part 3, which goes like this. The third way in which love is destroyed as a political concept is with love merging in unity, and thus love as the destruction of difference. Here too, I feel like I don't need to give that many examples of the love being that way. Like, one example you could get is in Romanticism. I'm thinking primarily comes to mind for me is German Romanticism, Goethe, Hegel, in which love does involve, and marriage itself involves, a merging into unity. Goethe's famous poem about the ginkgo leaf is that sort of merging into unity. Another way of posing this is mystical traditions in both Judaism and Christianity, and probably other religions I know less, which is that love is emerging into divine unity. that love of God becomes emerging within the divinity. And it seems to me that these are closely related to the identitarian conceptions of love I spoke of earlier. In other words, they mutually reinforce each other in a kind of circle, love of the same and love making the same, or love becoming the same. In this regard, it seems to me that we would have to, this would be the second part of this, instead one would have to conceive or practice love as being based on differences, love as experimenting with differences, creating out of them new assemblages that in no way deny their singularities. So in that way, love as an affirmation or even multiplication of singularities. This seems to me the great virtue of Lacanian psychoanalysis, or this is one thing that I find extraordinary in Lacan and clear. What Lacan is trying to guard against, it seems to me, is the destruction of differences. And what I'm thinking of primarily here as the example is Seminar 20, which in English is called On Female Sexuality, in which Lacan says some phrases that, at least for me, had remained quite mysterious until I tried to pose them in this way. So here's Lacan's critique of Freud in this Seminar 20. He says, for Freud, eros is defined as the fusion that makes one from two, as what is supposed to gradually tend to the direction of making but one from an immense multitude. So that's what he's critiquing Freud for that, for thinking of eros as emerging in unity. So therefore, when Lacan says there is no such thing as a sexual relationship, this was one of the mysterious phrases for me, and that love is impossible, he means that it's impossible to destroy difference, that is, difference as such. And so that seems to me, let's see, I wouldn't put it the way where he says love is impossible. I would say that we need to struggle against a notion of love that conceives eros as the merging into unity, the way Freud does. I would translate it to say that we need to rather construct a love that preserves difference and in fact works with differences, that even multiplies differences. The problem for me, of course, as I said earlier, is that Lacan is here only thinking about sexual difference. And I think that's true and important about sexual difference, but I would assume that one could extend it to other kinds of difference, other forms of difference. This would be an argument also against tolerance. I was thinking as an example here could be Pasolini's movie called Comizi d'amore, which in English is called Love Meetings. Very strange movie that Pasolini made where he goes around sort of documentary style and talks about love to people throughout Italy. And what I find is interesting is that Foucault wrote a little like review of it in Le Monde when it was projected in Paris called the Gray Mornings of Tolerance. And he sees it as an argument against indifference to sexuality. That's what he thinks Pasolini is doing, is recognizing the differences of sexuality and how tolerance poses sexuality from the lens of indifference and therefore destroys the differences of sexuality. So that I think, again, or that I'm using as a negative example in a way, of this third point, which is that love must be based on differences, or love as an experimenting with differences. What Deleuze and Guattari would say is that love, this is something else we talked about in the last couple of days, is love involves the multiplicity of multiplicities. In other words, recognizing all the multiplicities within yourself and the multiplicities within someone else, and there's a kind of conjunction or creation of assemblages between the different multiplicities and the different people that then create new differences.